everyone, welcome to Let's Talk About Skills, Baby. I am your host, Kelly Ryan Bailey. Each week, I chat with inspiring visionaries about the skills that make them successful, how they develop those skills, and their innovative approaches to improving skills-based hiring and learning around the world. Come learn what skills help you live your best life. My guest today is Danielle De La Fuente. Danielle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Kelly, for having me. Delighted to be here.
I want to give everyone a quick little background on Danielle. She has vast experience in peace building and diplomatic efforts stemming from her work at the U.S. Department of Defense and multiple embassies. Her passion for achieving sustainable development led her to form the Amal Alliance. Amal is a non-governmental, nonprofit organization that provides displaced and disfranchised children worldwide with social development programs that help cope with the invisible scars of trauma and the learning fundamentals that guarantee them future opportunities to succeed. As a passionate advocate for children's rights to education and to play, she specializes in social emotional learning. Bridging policy and practice, she sits on the advisory board of Boston University's Global Development Policy Center, chairs a G20Y committee, and forms part of numerous international coalitions and UN task teams for early childhood development and inclusive education. Like her work, Danielle's own background is rich in culture. She was born in San Diego to immigrant parents from Mexico and Iran and is multilingual. She's also lived in 4 countries. She has her BA in International Relations from Boston University and a master's in Peace and Conflict Studies from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. I know, Danielle, I want to even mention that you are active with your Rotary. You're a kids yoga instructor and a mindfulness educator, which I just find so fascinating because those are just like all areas that I'm really interested in. Now, thank you so much for letting me gush on you, by the way. I would love to sort of jump in and just get a little bit more detail on your journey. What led you to really start Amal? Maybe, and I love to hear the stories behind this.
Yeah, no, I'd love to share. So, I mean, as you mentioned, I sort of a jack of all trades. So, I'm a kids yoga teacher, a mindfulness educator, and my previous incarnation, I was working for the U.S. Department of Defense. And I used to make a joke that I was like eHarmony for policy because I would bring countries together and we talk about energy security and water security. And we do this over breakfast. But essentially, one of the things that I thought was really lacking in the conversation was, people really didn't have these social emotional skills. They didn't have this emotional intelligence. So at the end of the day, we were trying to reach a resolution, but it was almost like people were speaking over each other. And so I kept thinking, it wouldn't it be great if we taught these communication skills, like all these things at a very early age, and we wouldn't be sitting here years later in these conversations when the problem already existed. And so I went back to school and I did my master's in peace and conflict studies. And I was really shocked to learn that in essence, just because you have the absence of war and now, there's no conflict, everyone just kind of returns to daily life and pretends that there wasn't this trauma and all these things that definitely not only affect the individual, but the community at large. And so a lot of the programs really didn't touch upon this. It was really humanitarian aid focused on the basic needs, the food, the water, the shelter, which is very, very important. I'm not discounting it. But at the end of the day, we're individuals, and we also need to heal from overcoming these things. So I guess it was a moment in my life where my grandmother had passed away, and I was trying to find a little bit of purpose and meaning in my own life. I was doing my kids yoga teacher training in Greece, and I just happened to be very close to islands with a lot of children that had been displaced from war and conflict were living in these tended communities. And really, it was shocking to see because you think Greece and you think these beautiful area and vacation,
Right.
and you don't imagine just these horrifically impoverished areas with children that are just destitute and don't really have any access to education or any opportunities. And so I just chatted with the kids and asked them, tell me about your journey. Tell me how you got here. Tell me, what you feel is missing. And a lot of them were missing those socialization aspects that you would get in school. Obviously this going to school itself. And so I just started combining two and two together and thought, I'm listening to what they need. And, in the States, we're using mindfulness and kids yoga to sort of kind of do a more holistic approach to education. And
Mhm.
I kept thinking, if it's working so well here, why wouldn't it work in a conflict area?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's sort of how it kind of began, and then it took a life of its own.
Wow, that is so interesting. Danielle, sorry, I'm going to pause for a second. You have alerts going off on your computer.
My goodness, I'm
It's
so sorry.
okay. I was just going to say, we'll take a second and it's no big deal. They're going to edit this out. So
It's that. Let me see how to do it. Turn them off. There's a snooze, isn't there?
there is a snooze.
Yes, I just found it. Do not disturb.
I don't know if it's Slack. That's what I had to do. I always forget. So I was like, oh my gosh. No, no worries. But anyway, so that is just so fascinating that you saw something, from this experience that, again, seemingly two like unrelated situations in your life, but then all of a sudden you realized, wow, when I hear this, it really makes me think this could be an amazing solution. And I also really love the policy view that you had. Like this started with adults and sort of like handling a situation and trying to come to a resolution. Because I often say that, and I've been having these conversations a lot lately too. Is if we kind of started back at the beginning, how easy or easier, at least in our mind, would it be? Because we already know the foundations for kind of like understanding empathy towards what other people's situation would be, and how to communicate, just those basics on SEL that could really make such a huge difference. But like you said, you see these individuals that are having this trauma, you had some yourself, and it affects you, and you can't just like push it aside. There's only so long you can push it aside. It's going to like rear up in different ways, and if it's reverberated through a community, I can only imagine.
No, exactly. And I think you just said something really key about the foundation. How important are these skills? Forget about living in a war zone or surviving conflict. I mean, even just in everyday life that, there's so many children that are being bullied now in school, or, just someone that's maybe of a different ethnicity or of a different color or race. You need to really have these bases to be very accepting, and just put yourself in other people's shoes and just remove judgment. It really makes for a much better society at large. But unfortunately, it's only, I think it took a pandemic to
Right.
these issues to a surface, saying, hey, there's a lot going on that we're not addressing in schools and how, children learn. And I think, I mean, if we can sediment the right foundation, it's a game changer for the future.
I wholeheartedly agree. It's like I even think back to my own self in school, and I didn't really think about that, all that much until I had my own children in a school environment. But I will like share with you all that I was terribly bullied in school, like for years, and would come home crying almost every day for like throughout elementary school, through middle school, and sometimes even in high school. It was awful. And I think back and I'm like, man, if I just had the abilities to handle that in a different way, how different would my life have been?
Well, and I mean, I used to, when I was a kid, I was very, very thin and I had big ears. So I had the fortune of being called Dumbo on occasion. But, I grew into my ears,
No.
benefits of weight gain. But, I agree. And I was very fortunate to have, a mother that was incredibly compassionate and empathetic and, taught me to sort of build confidence and resilience and just kind of push these things to the side. But not everyone has that same fortune. And especially a lot of the children that we deal with, they're unaccompanied minors. Their parents wanted them to have a better life. So they put them on a boat knowing that the land that they were on was just so much more dangerous. And most of these children are really struggling because, they're wandering around life on their own. Imagine as an adult, it's hard
Mhm.
enough, but maybe being a 11 or 10-year-old child. And then add to that all sorts of security risks, because if you're sitting in a refugee camp or any sort of settlement and you have absolutely nothing to do, boredom is really just
Mm.
the leads to all sorts of other dangers, because now you're susceptible to being, recruited by a terrorist organization, or by entering a life of crime, or just, being abducted, human traffic. There's so many security risks. So one of the things that we really try to do also is mitigate these security risks by, embracing the children to have a venue, to have a safe space where they can come and they can express themselves. And so that's also one element that's really important to us. So not just the learning and the skills, but
Yeah.
providing them this element of protection, and just a space that they can come and be, almost like a home-like environment.
Hmm. No, that sounds so nice. So when, like, what, I mean, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how this all started with the mall, and maybe some of the areas that you're actually operating in, and sort of what that looks like, so that we can kind of picture it for ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. I'll give you a sort of a pre-COVID view and then a post-COVID view, because it's
Sure.
changed dramatically. So essentially, prior to COVID, we were working in Greece, Lebanon, and Turkey. And we work with women from the community, as well, especially organizations on the ground, so small organizations that may not have tremendous amount of funding for these fancy curriculums and big trainings.
Mhm.
So we empower them. We train their teachers, women from the camps, to be the teachers, provide them the curriculum, the materials, and then they in turn impart what we call a rainbow of education. Um,
Mm.
and so it's a rainbow because imagine it's for children. So you have red being emotions, and green being compassion, blue being empathy. And so the idea is that as children go through the different colors of the rainbow, they acquire those foundational interpersonal, and social emotional skills.
Mhm.
It's a 6-month program. It's not a one-stop shop. It really works best when it's complemented with other programs. So if
Mhm.
there's like a really dynamic, like literacy and numeracy program that like UNICEF is doing, or something of that sort, but really just to help children heal and then put them on the track to their most basic foundational education. And so when COVID hit, obviously classes stopped. We were working inside of community centers. We really wanted to figure out how we could continue our work. But
Yeah.
this isn't your typical setting. It's not like, you're sitting in California or New York and, your child has access to Zoom. I mean, in this case, there's very limited devices to begin with. And then even if there are devices, most likely you don't have an internet connection.
Yeah.
Uh, and so we were trying to figure out what could we possibly do. And it was very clear that this massive problem was going to require a very equally comprehensive response. And so we spearheaded an emergency response COVID consortium and brought together lots of really wonderful organizations, from Salzburg Global Seminar to Karanga to Qatar Foundation International and Learning in Times of Crisis. And essentially, we all built on each other's expertise and skills and produced what we named was We Are in This Together. And it was a podcast series,
Oh,
interestingly
nice.
enough. And this sort of happened naturally, dynamically. We were trying to figure out, like, what could we do? And, most parents had a phone. And so we thought, okay, well, if you're kind of trapped in a location with no sanitation, no possibility of social distancing, and no materials, well, at least you could get like a voice note with some instructions or ideas of different coping mechanisms that you could do with your children.
Mhm.
Um, and so it was a six episode series. We touched on hygiene. We touched on all sorts of wonderful themes.
Wow.
And it ended up reaching about 160,000 users within a month. And these are users without internet. so, so that was absolutely incredible.
That is amazing. I just can't even, that's just a huge amount of people. And in with those constraints, for this group to come together in that short period of time and be able to make that much of a difference.
I think the reason we were able to kind of get it out there so quickly was we were timeliness. So when the pandemic started in March, we got it out, we translated it in 4 languages, and it was out for distribution by very early April.
Mhm.
And at the time, I think a lot of the very large NGOs were still trying to figure out what they were going to even do.
Yeah.
And so here we had something. Maybe it wasn't the best solution, but it was a solution, and we distributed it and said, hey, everyone use it. We just want everyone that we can reach. So about 543 organizations ended up adopting it. So,
Wow.
I mean, admittedly, it was very difficult to track. So we were able to track, okay, well, this
Of
organization
course.
used it, this, but we just wanted to get it out there. And that sort of gave life to something else, because so at that time was when the UN, especially UNHCR, was really trying to figure out what they were going to do with all of these out of school children, because
Mhm.
now it's an emergency within an emergency.
Right.
so, so it's just compounded, and what do we do? So they had received our podcast, and so we were invited to apply to this COVID-19 challenge
Mhm.
to present solutions that could basically create an education and emergency prototype. Um,
Mhm.
and it was grueling. I mean, we were like, if we went from 80 to top 16 to top 10, and then finally we made it into the finalists, and we were so excited. Um,
Wow.
so we were really, really blessed to be able to work with UNHCR and IDEO to build out this prototype. We worked with a tech partner in Dubai, Ustad Mobile, and essentially created the same idea as the podcast, but now made it more dynamic with like a digital workbook and a
Right.
learning management system that worked offline. And so it was piloted in Bangladesh, and just concluded in December.
That is so exciting. Like how was everyone receiving it?
So I'm not a big crier, but I was in a meeting a couple days ago, and it was our end of the project meeting, and just hearing all of the feedback and seeing all the pictures, I was literally in tears. I mean, it was
Oh,
probably one of our most successful programs thus far.
wow.
The kids all kept saying that they wish that they had this earlier on in the pandemic.
Yeah.
The parents all noted, it was a 97% of the parents noted that the change in mood and temperament in their children was very visible. We had a
Me
16
cry.
point, yeah, I mean, 16.5% increase in development of social and emotional competencies. I mean, that's huge. It was a 10-week pilot. So seeing that it was so successful in such a short period really makes me very hopeful that if this were to be properly extended over the course of the
Right.
year, I mean, we could see much more long-term
Wow.
sustainable impact.
So what are the next plans for it?
Yeah, so we're writing the report. So in the coming weeks, so we'll have all the jiffy facts and figures to
Yep.
present. And then our goal is then to scale it. So the incubator, which basically put on this challenge, is called Humanitarian Education Accelerator.
Okay.
Um, and it's backed by a lot of really great people, like from everyone from USAID to DFID to Lego to Porticus. So we'll be pitching them end of the month to see obviously if they liked our solution, and then also what the scale journey would look like and where.
Yeah.
So I know that they have some priority areas, and so those would probably align. But I mean, really, the need is everywhere now. I mean, you have out of school children
That's
basically.
what I was gonna say. I was like, is this really just only for, children that are in like trauma crisis zones, or is that, I mean, because when you're describing it, I just think there's so many. You think about like the internet, barren places, even just in the massive US, because there's just so many spots that just don't have it, but across the world.
Yeah, no, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, really, the way it was designed is to help children transition back into the classroom. So it's a hybrid. So there is in-person instruction, but in very small groups. And we were really, really happy that there were zero infections. None of the children, none of the teachers, no one in the community had any sort of
Fabulous.
COVID exposure throughout. So because we
Mhm.
were really worried, during the pilot,
Sure.
like, is this going to be something that's going to happen?
Yeah.
We were able to kind of prove that in these sort of dynamic small groups and with the activities that we were proposing, everything was contained. And it helps the children go back into school because it's all based on social emotional learning. So it's not, we're not teaching math, we're not teaching science. We're really helping the children overcome what they're living at this point and then be ready to transition back into the classroom. So we're even in conversations now with even organizations in Chicago, like you said, even
Yeah.
in our backyard areas that might not have as much connectivity to their schools. So really, we hope that some governments will work with us to adopt the
Yeah.
model as the kids kind of go back into the classroom. But it's really going to be, I think, a case by case. Let's see which governments are a little bit more inclined to explore into the unknown, since social emotional learning is still a bit not mainstream.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like I agree with you. Last year was just this moment where it kind of got it into the spotlight. Me personally, I didn't have the name to it until I started hearing about it last year, but it was like what I was referred to as growth mindset. And it's what I've focused on with my children basically within the first 2 years of finding out my daughter had issues learning at school. And it has been a life changer. But I can say that even even in like what I would refer to as a non-crisis zone, we're all experiencing trauma in our own respects. And even my own children, we've been having trouble. My oldest daughter, who's 12, I'm like picturing, even for someone like her, like she is just really struggling with not being in the school environment. And we're so fortunate to have like a lot of virtual capabilities, of course, but she's still like emotionally and mentally struggling.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really enjoyed watching in this pilot, so the way we sort of broke it out is we took the five main social emotional competencies that
Mhm.
Castle names, and we kind of just I broadened them, right?
Yeah.
So
Well,
the
for
first.
those who don't, yeah, and for those who don't know them, do you mind like saying, yeah.
Yes, yes. So you have a self-awareness and you have a self-management, you have social awareness, you have relationship building, and of course now the last one escapes me. Oh my goodness, it'll come to me.
Yeah. And
It'll
you
come.
know what? When I share this, I like have a beautiful image that I like to share with it. So I'll share that.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and now of course this is going to drive me crazy at the last
You'll think
one.
of it while we're chatting.
But essentially, for instance, like let's look at just self-awareness. I think right now, even just being able to name your emotion is something that a lot of people are unfamiliar with.
Yep.
Um, because it's not, a lot of people know the common emotions like I'm happy or I'm sad, but there's so many other emotions.
Oh,
And just being able to say, okay, well, I feel exhausted or I'm actually really irritated, and that's okay.
yep.
So naming it and then figuring out different ways that you can manage that, I think has been a key to the children. And the way we did it was every week they would take their emotional temperature. Uh,
I
and it
love
was a really cute thermometer. And
that.
then they would kind of like see where they landed on the scale. And then once they were in that emotional temperature, then they would, identify what they were feeling. And just having that opportunity to express it, I think is also important because
Mhm.
if a child is feeling scared and they don't want to mention it, but then maybe somebody else is feeling that same way, it builds a bond.
Yep, because there's something about understanding that you're not alone
Yes.
that changes it, because it's like that internal, sort of like everything just piles up inside when you think you're the crazy one. People don't feel this way.
Exactly. And yeah, and so it's been something really beautiful to watch.
Yeah.
So I mean, in the direction as to, I feel like we're going to be in this hybrid mode for a while.
Yep.
Uh, so that's sort of where we're going. I mean, we obviously, everything that was built into this prototype was based on our original Rainbow curriculum.
Mhm.
So now it's, we have, I guess, the best of both worlds. And then when in-person instruction is ready, I think the world is now more accepting of, hey, it's time to look at, the whole person, not just different
Yes.
segments of it.
Yes, I absolutely love that. So, I actually wanted to, I'm just curious, how you kind of came up with this concept of the rainbow in the,
It's actually the simplest thing. So when I realized that there was definitely some intersection between, what I was seeing at like a policy level and then, working with children, and I kept thinking there wasn't a lot of research at the time that linked like early childhood with peace, but it was sort of like okay and obvious in my book.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so I mean, I wasn't an expert in all things, but I noticed that, every organization worked in a particular silo. So it was like they were just doing reading, or they were just doing dance, or they were just doing, something else. And I kept thinking, well, why is no one working together? This is the humanitarian world after all. Like, shouldn't we all be getting
Right.
along and working together? And it just made more sense to me because, as a child, you don't learn in these different compartments like, oh, okay, well, from 3 to 5 we're going to do this. And so I thought, why aren't we all working together to blend it? And this blended approach would just seem more natural and flow. And so I contacted leaders in kids yoga or leaders in mindfulness and leaders in dance and said, hey, you're really good at dance. Like, I know nothing about dance therapy, but what if we were to add it into what we're already doing with yoga, what we're already doing with mindfulness? And so essentially the rainbow was built from everyone's input, all these amazing experts, all these amazing organizations that basically
Wow.
contributed their expertise. So when I was trying to figure out what we were going to call it, there was this intern with us, and she was like, well, it's really like like a melange. I'm like, yeah. And then somehow it came up like, yeah, it's like a rainbow, like an assortment. I'm like, yes, it's a rainbow. And so that's really how it came about. It was just trying to give everyone the appreciation and thanks and that they deserved, and that's sort of how it got named.
Wow. Now, when you once you create this, sort of combined blended approach, if you will, do you still, because how long has Amal been around, by the way? I should have asked that at the
We
beginning.
just turned 3.
Oh
So
my gosh, so
we just turned
exciting. That's really exciting. Congratulations. So do you guys still work, like have a group of like various people that you rely on to sort of,
Yeah. So I mean, so essentially when the rainbow curriculum was built, I mean, this thing is humongous. It's about like 400 pages worth of lesson plans. And so it was written in a way that, if you didn't have any background in anything that I just mentioned, if you could read, you could teach it. But the most important part was really the training, because you can't teach empathy if you don't understand what it is. And so you really, and also there's a very fine line of doing good and doing harm.
right?
So we would really just train them as to why we were teaching this, what's the correct manner, how to work with children that have survived trauma, etc. And then they had all the content basically already laid out.
Wow.
And so as it's evolved, because we get lots of feedback from the teachers and the kids, we've adapted, right? So,
Mhm.
in Lebanon, for instance, dance was not surprisingly as successful as it was in Greece,
Mhm.
which was kind of ironic because we thought it was going to be sort of like a really exciting addition.
Right.
But yet the mindfulness was like booming. And so we tweaked it, to okay, well let's make it more adaptable to this community. Whereas in Turkey they wanted a little bit more of like teamwork and sort of goal setting, sort of
Yeah.
decision making. So then we tweaked it a little bit more and added more games that did that. So it's really evolved a lot.
Mhm.
And I think the reason that it's been very easy to apply is because it's contextualized and localized to whichever community that is using it. And so, yeah, we were actually really fortunate. I have to brag.
Thank
And
you.
last year, oh, wait, no, now in December of 2019,
Yeah.
we were named as the most promising holistic practice at the inaugural Global Refugee Forum. So that was like a huge badge of
Wow.
honor. Yes, and then of course the world stopped 3 months later, but
Right. Right. Well, you got that in there first. So now, so you take, so I, just to make sure that I understood that correctly. So you take this like whole huge rainbow curriculum and you'll sort of like tweak it depending on the group, like the location or the group that you're working with. Oh, I think we froze there for a second. I was asking, so you just, I wanted to make sure I understood you correctly. So you take this whole big rainbow curriculum and you tweak it, for each group or location that you're working with.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And so the pilot, by the way, that one that we produced in COVID, it's called Colors of Kindness.
Oh,
So it was renamed because it really is, even though it's inspired from the rainbow, it's really
oh,
just its own sort of, because the rainbow curriculum does do reading and writing and all sorts of other things, whereas this was specifically social emotional learning.
yes.
And we try to continue with the whole idea of colors and
No, I think it's great. And I think so like appropriate for right now too. And actually it's funny because when you just reminded me too, what the temperature taking of your emotions and sort of these colors. My son is in virtual kindergarten and he does that at the beginning of each day. They talk about being like, are you in the green zone? Are you in the red zone? And I love the way that she describes it. Like the red zone isn't only anger. It's like, if you're really excited, if you're really frustrated, if you're really tired, like there's multiple things that can make you sort of that like
I love that. I
it's
love
like
that.
this like complex, like our emotions are just so complex. That's the thing is like if you just say I'm mad, it's so hard to determine like you feel like oh, but it's if you're mad, if it's not madness, you tend to like deflect it onto whatever the thing is. And you're not realizing that like actually it's not that at all. It's just that you're tired.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. Like sometimes you think you're feeling one thing, but when you kind of take a little time to really reflect, and you're like, oh, actually, no, it's an underlying emotion, and this is just how I'm perceiving it.
Yeah. I'm like the worst person I'm like hangry. I'm really one of those people. Most of the time I'm like, oh, hold on a second. I'm just really hungry. We're going to stop. I'm going to go eat.
I'm one of those people too.
I really just love everything you're doing. So like if there's other organizations that end up listening in, and they're interested in, working with you all or somehow collaborating with you all, I'm trying to think of like the various ways, because immediately when I'm hearing this, I'm thinking, oh, wow, what if someone else wants to take your colors of kindness and, bring it into another community or somehow wants to collaborate with you or any of the other ones? Because I think there's a lot of options here. Do they just contact Amal or do you have like various options of the way that you work with organizations?
Yeah, so I mean, typically, I feel like this year has been, or this past year has been so different. So we're open to anything and everything now. Where I feel like please just contact us. Our goal is to reach as many kids as possible, and like I said, I mean, the need is there everywhere. Pretty much, you name a location, a community, a country, it's there. So currently, our content for Colors of Kindness exists in English, Bangla, and in Rohingya.
Mhm.
And so obviously, but it exists in these formats and can be very easily translated. So I'm happy to work with anyone really that wants to adopt that or a rainbow of education, because I do think moving forward, we're going to be in this limbo a little bit more to get the children to catch up before we can really get into the actual learning aspects of, going back to, I don't know, science and and history, etc.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing I think about with this is we're, of course you've created this for children, but I also wonder there's so many organizations out there right now that are thinking of this mindset and culture shift in the workplace. And like you said, you saw it initially in your policy work with adults. So I even wonder if I feel like this year makes us all think outside of the box, right? Or this past year, because I'm forgetting that we're already in a new year. But it's all making us think outside of the box. So I even wonder if what you've created could create a collaboration with an organization that may be trying to put together sort of various, I'm thinking like modules in my mind for workplace training. I kind of wish we would start our meetings sometimes with like, okay, temperature check of emotions in the room, people.
Who's on the
Let's all take in a deep breath, right? Like, because it really changes how you approach whatever the next thing that you're doing if you all just sort of like have that moment.
Well, and it sets the tone, really. No, yes, we actually just had a board meeting last week, and we're discussing that because
Okay.
I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, even though we designed it for kids, and yes, we're playing and drawing and singing and dancing, I mean, it's the exact same thing that can be taught to adults. And hey, adults like to play and dance and,
Yeah.
but I mean, even make it, but it could very, very easily be used for adults in any even corporation, even in the private sector, not even just an
Yeah.
organization. But I don't like to stretch ourselves too thin. I
Of course.
do. I'm very cognizant of the fact that we do early education and we do psychosocial support and social emotional learning well with kids, and we do
Mhm.
it really well. I don't want to just kind of spread ourselves too thin and then do it sort of okay and then sort of okay
Yeah,
here.
that makes sense.
But I do think that given our expertise, if any corporation or anything wants us to consult and give them tips of how we've done it and how they can structure it,
Sure.
I mean, these are just universally applicable concepts. I mean, it's really not that difficult. And if we can
Yeah.
do it in a conflict area in a Bangladesh,
Right.
virtually, it can be done pretty much anywhere. So yeah, we're happy to support and help where we're needed.
That's wonderful. Well, that's really good to know. And I'm about to let everyone know where to find all the information. But since we're coming to the end of our time here, Danielle, I'd love to give you that last moment to sort of open-endedly leave us with your parting thoughts.
Oh my, our parting thoughts. Okay, well, because we're talking about skills, baby. I think the COVID pandemic obviously had so many challenges, and we can't we have to make note of that. But I also think it was a real opportunity to reimagine how we learn and how learning can take place anywhere at any time, and that includes all ages. So from your earliest years until your late age. I mean, I'm always learning. I'm always hopefully learning new things and meeting new people. And so I think if we can embrace that and see that as a real opportunity and say, okay, well, our education systems were forged in the 18th century and really need a revamp. And, what are our children really learning, or where do we want to be in 40 years? What do we want to see in our next generation? I think it's really peak time for us to make those policy changes, to advocate, to really be ambassadors for this opportunity. So I welcome everyone to advocate with us, and hopefully we can make a more promising tomorrow, because I think time is ripe.
Wow, so well said. I love it. Well, thank you so much again, Danielle, for joining. I'm just excited to even from here on out continue conversations and figure out ways to collaborate, because I'm already thinking of like areas where people might be, wanting to work with what you guys have built. So I'm going to keep all that in mind. But for anyone else who's also thinking the same thing, you can find the Amal Alliance at amalalliance.org. They are also available on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And Danielle is available on LinkedIn, and she is also on Instagram at Dani, DANI _ De La Fuente. So thank you all for listening into Let's Talk About Skills, baby. If you enjoyed this podcast, please definitely subscribe. We are on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. I can't even think anymore, honestly. The new year's got me all mixed up. And then, of course, we're available on all the same socials you see here, along with me at Kelly Ryan Bailey. Danielle, thank you again.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.